Hans Niemann is back in action as the US Chess Championships are taking place in St. Louis. And now, you probably remember Hans and St. Louis, that is quite an unfortunate combination, as on one occasion Hans completely destroyed the hotel room in that city during one of the events organized by the St. Louis Chess Club, and in response the chess club decided to ban Hans for the remaining tournaments, invitational events in 2024 organized by the chess club. But this is the national championship and the best players of the country are participating. Only Hikaru Nakamura is not there, but Hans is allowed to play there. So Hans has the chance to win his first US championship. And that would be quite a nice result for him if that happens. First things first, it's round one. And Hans is playing with the white pieces against world's number 3, Fabiano Caruana. A very interesting match, as we will get to see very interesting chess being played. But we know also that Fabi is quite a tough opponent for Hans. I remember particularly the last couple of games, Fabi having a pretty good score against Hans. So let's see what's going to happen. If you do like this video and you want to see more of the US Chess Championships, make sure to subscribe to the channel and I'll keep you up to date. Hans opened the game with the move 1e4. Fabi goes for e5, knight f3, knight c6. We get to see bishop c4, bishop c5, the Italian opening nowadays, one of the most popular openings out there. Castling kingside, d6, white plays the move c3, and the bishop, anticipating coming under attack by the d-pawn or even the b-pawn, drops back to b6, d3, and well, many different ways to play this position here as black, but in the majority of cases, black just continues now on the previous move or on the next move just by developing the knight to its most active post f6. But Fabiano has a totally different plan. He goes for the move h6. That in itself is not a bad move. You can still consider placing your knight on f6. You're controlling the g5 square, so the bishop cannot come out to g5 anytime soon. White goes rook e1. But now, the first very interesting moment in the game on move 7, as instead of placing that knight on f6, Fabiano Caruana puts the queen on that square. And that is quite a remarkable, but also very active way of playing. There are no immediate threats. I mean, the knight on f3 prevents the queen from capturing the pawn on f2. But why do you put that queen on f6? Well, that can only be a good idea if you're looking for some action on the king side. Let's see what Fabiano has in mind here. Hans played here the move b4, grabbing space on the queen side. Knight ge7, well, that's the only available square for the knight. White goes for the move a4, attacking almost the bishop, just one move away. I mean, you would like to play the move a5, and therefore black played the move a5 here. To attack the pawn on b4, white goes for the move b5, attacking the knight. The knight goes back to d8. Very interesting plan. As where is this knight going next? Well, white played here bishop e3, and the knight goes to e6. So here Fabiano says, okay, you can take the bishop on b6. I will take back with the c-pawn. And in that case, I mean, the queen side is sort of locked, and the knight has a beautiful square on f4 from where it can target the white king. So instead of trading off the bishops on b6, Hans played here the move knight bd2, keeping that dark squared bishop on the board. Anyway, knight goes to f4, and white tries to strike in the center with the move d4, challenging the pawn on e5, trying to undermine that outpost of the knight on f4. Bishop goes to g4, pinning the knight on f3, and white kicks the bishop away with the move h3. Bishop goes back to h5 to maintain the pin. Now, instructive move by Hans, as he goes back all the way with the bishop to f1. And now you're thinking, well, that bishop was beautifully placed on c4. But there are two reasons, at least, why you go back with the bishop to f1. First thing is that you're vacating the c4 square. On a good day, that knight can come to c4 to attack the bishop, and to hit the pawn on e5. Another plan could be to prepare the move g3. And therefore you need your bishop on f1, as once you play g3, the pawn on h3 can be hanging. So the bishop is fantastically placed, and that's a rule of thumb in a lot of positions. When you place the bishop on 2 squares distance, you're taking away the active squares from the enemy's knight. Now, interesting moment still. Black has almost completed his development, but what is he going to do with his king? Now, there are different ways of playing. You can castle kingside, which was played in the game by Fabi. Even castling queenside is not a strange idea here at all. One of the reasons to castle queenside could be to launch your g-pawn, and even here, a move like g5 with the idea to go g4, super aggressive, must have been considered by Fabiano. He didn't play it. I'm thinking that he didn't like White's response g4, when it will still be quite difficult to break through. But we will never find out, because Fabi decided to castle kingside anyway. That is kind of a solid way of playing. But there are clear drawbacks to this move. But what is White going to do now? There are quite a number of interesting ideas. First things first, knight c4. The move I mentioned earlier is not good here, because the knight is needed on d2 to overprotect the knight on f3. Knight c4 runs into knight takes h3, check, and if you take the knight, his bishop takes f3, black wins the pawn, and the white king is totally open. So that's not a good move. You got to keep your knight on d2. Here, I would think that something like g3 is the most principled way of playing, to kick the knight out. It was not played in the game, but after something like knight e6, for instance, you can even go g4 and unpin the knight. And well, it's kind of a problematic position here for black, with the pieces not looking great. But I will show you what happened in the game, as instead of g3, White played the move rook to c1. Mysterious rook move. What is that rook doing on the c file while the file is still closed? You're hoping, of course, that at some point black is going to take, so that you're able to recapture with the c pawn, so that the file will be opened. Probably the best move here for black is to continue with a move like g5 anyway. It was not played, but I want to show you one idea. I think the reason the rook is on c1 is for the following plan. White could probably take on e5, and after taking back, launch the pawn, the c pawn, so that you want to prepare the move c5 to trap the bishop. And well, if the bishop will be trapped, it will be out of play. So that is sort of White's plan. And obviously, Fabiano realized that that could become a problem. So he dropped back with a knight to e6. So he is intensifying the pressure against the pawn on d4. So the pawn has been attacked now by pawn, knight, queen and bishop. And there's also this pin. So Hans has to play super actively here. Play the move g4. Excellent move. Unpinning the knight, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back to g6. Only move. And here, one of the key moments in the game. Because how is White gonna follow up here? Because the move g4 is also quite a weakening one. I mean, the f4 square is a fantastic spot for the knight to land. But here, in this moment, Hans has a very, very strong move. He can actually play here the move h4. And that is remarkable, and probably also quite a difficult move to evaluate. I mean, to see it, it's not a big problem, but to evaluate it properly, it's quite hard. But the thing is that g5 is a serious threat here. When the queen on f6 is almost trapped. I mean, the minor pieces, they're all standing in the way of the queen. And even if you move your bishop away, then g5 can be played. And this was all not played in the game. h4 was not played by Hans Niemann, but it's super instructive, and it really nicely illustrates the downsides of black's very ambitious opening play. Here, if you do take the pawn, and after recapturing, queen goes to g6, it's knight h4, queen is trapped. Queen on d1 covers the h5 square, pawn on g5 is defended by the bishop. So you can't really take on g5. But even if you move your queen to g6, you got to attack the queen one more time here as white. You can do that by sacrificing your knight first on e5. Wonderful idea. If you take the knight, then it's h5 and the queen on g6 is trapped. Here you see the queen on d1 defending the pawn. So that is very instructive line. Probably after the move h4, black has to come up with a different plan. Maybe knight f4 can be played still. You can still continue with g5, and after exchanging the pawns, the queen can go to e6. Looks like the queen is much safer there, but after bishop takes f4, e takes f4, let's say you put the knight on h4, the pawn on f4 is pretty vulnerable. The queen can come in, white has a beautiful pawn center, and now the pawn on e5 is gone. That bishop on b6 probably will not join play, will get back into the game very, very soon. So altogether, this h4 move turned out to be really strong, and according to the machine, it's almost decisive. Well, the fact that it was underestimated by Caruana and also by Hans, well, it shows that it's a difficult line. But anyway, Hans had a different plan because he realizes that, well, there are some issues regarding the pawn on d4, but he comes up with this move. Look, knight takes e5, piece sacrifice, d takes e5, d takes e5, queen is under attack, and queen captures the pawn on e5, obviously, and now the knight goes to f3. And you see that the queen doesn't have many good squares to go to. I mean, if you go back to f6, well, look, that queen doesn't have any squares. There is the move e5, and the queen is trapped once again. So black, no choice here, decides to take the pawn on e4, but that opens up the file for the rook on e1. Bishop takes b6. Guys, there is a discovered attack on the queen, and looks pretty active here for white. Bishop pair, open position, attack against the queen. But rather than moving the queen away, Fabi has an excellent idea now. By counter-attacking the white queen with rook a8, excellent move. If you do take the queen on e4, you can take on d1. Let's say rook takes e4, rook takes d1, rook takes d1, bishop takes e4, and now both pieces are hanging. Black is in really good shape there. So that is not a solution for white. There follow the move knight to d4. So you're solving the threat. The queen is no longer hanging. That black queen is under an attack. Got to move now. Queen to f4. And now still the bishop on b6 is also hanging. So there followed bishop takes a5. So white is up a pawn, but not for long, because the pawn goes to b6 to hit the bishop. Bishop to b4. And now it is time for knight takes d4. Excellent move, and white is forced to give back some of his material advantage. I mean, don't take the knight on e7. There is knight f3, and here white's position is falling apart. So after knight takes d4, white is well advised here to simply recapture. Pawn takes d4, and now it is rook takes d4, attacking the queen, and also attacking the bishop on b4. Queen e2 played. All the pieces are coming off the board now. Rook takes b4, queen takes e7, rook takes a4, queen takes c7. So positioned with queens, rooks and one bishop each. Well, 4 pawns on the board as well. Looks very even. Black tried here to move h5 to try to open up the white's king side. Queens are coming off the board as well. White captures on h5. And then comes in with the rook to c6 to hit the pawn on b6. Black has to defend it. Here the rook comes into e7. So here you see that white's pieces are more active. Black obviously has a slightly better pawn structure, but it's a still quite interesting endgame. Let's have a look. King f8, attacking the rook. Rook goes to a7. And now it's rook e4. As the rook really wants to come back to consolidate the 7th rank. King g2. Rook e7, hitting the rook on a7. Rook a6, attacking the pawn twice now. Rook eb7, defending it. King to g3, white is activating the king. Black played the move f6. Bishop comes to g2. Here you see that the bishop is trying to attack the rook on b7. bishop e8 played. Here it is black who hits the rook on c6 first, but the rook happily moves away to e6, so that now the rook on b7 is under threat. If you move the rook, well, then the pawn on b6 hangs, so that's not a good move. Black instead played here bishop to d7 to try to force the rook to leave the 6th rank. Well, bishop takes b7 was played, bishop takes e6, and now white should not really take the pawn on b6. It does allow bishop c8, and the bishop on b7 is pinned, as the rook on b6 is unprotected. Well, instead of taking the pawn, there followed bishop c6, so white is having everything pretty well covered. King f7, rook a7, king g6. Now the king is also active, rook e7, bishop c4, h4, king h6, f3. White's trying to keep black under control. This rook cannot easily become active, as if you move it away, there are always plans of like rook b7, rook takes pawn. So black is making moves with the bishop, bishop d3, rook d7, bishop f5, attacking the rook, rook d6, bishop c2, bishop to d5. Look now what's happening. Bishop d3, bishop f7, attacking the bishop, and this pawn on b5 is unprotected. But if you do take it, look, there is rook d5 attacking the bishop. If bishop goes away, spectacular mating net at the side of the board. Rook and bishop working together. So black should not fall into this temptation to take the pawn. Bishop went back to f1, king f2, rook f8, counter-attacking the other bishop. That looks like a nice idea. If the bishop is moving away, let's say you go to e6, then you can take on b5, and there's no longer that sort of double attack with rook d5. There's no mating idea here because the bishop doesn't support the h5 square. You can take on h6 and it's going to be a draw anyway. But Hans played, instead of moving the bishop, he captured the bishop on f1, rook takes f7, and now king f2 after king h5. Well, the pawn on b6 can be taken, but if you do take it, there is of course king takes h4. So instead white first protects the pawn with the king, rook b7, rook d5, king goes back, king g4. Still white is a bit more active, so black has to be precise. But rook c7 is a nice classy move. You're activating the rook, and after rook d6 you're not going to defend the pawn, but instead rook c4 was played. Nice active defense. As after f4 the rook goes behind the passed pawn. Black is about to take the pawn, but white is first. Rook takes b6. So now, almost at the end of the game, white has managed to win a pawn, but it's not going to be enough because g6 is a very nice move with the plan of playing the move f5 to force the king to go backwards, and you cannot really make progress here. The rook is excellently placed, keeping an eye on these pawns, and even if you play something like rook b7, just an example, you can even go rook b3. With the threat of f5, it could be a mating idea for black. White can still solve the problem by playing h5 or f5, but that's something you don't want. Anyway, black is totally fine here. That is the main thing I wanted to share with you. There followed rook takes f6, rook takes b5. Now it's a 2 versus 1 on one side of the board. Pawns are split, so this is an easy draw. Rook e6 played, rook a5, rook e5. Don't go for the king and pawn endgame. That's something you better don't do. You can keep rooks on the board, and you can give some checks from behind, or try to hit the pawns when the king is walking too far away from them. White played f5, pawn takes, rook a4, rook f4, and now the king and pawn endgame is of course not a problem with only an h-pawn. Well, this is a very simple draw. Few more moves are played. Usually people agree to a draw at this level. Maybe there's some beef between Niemann and Fabi as well. So here Hans played on till the very end, which is of course allowed, but something you don't very often see at the highest level. Here a draw is simply unavoidable. It's still made, and that means that Hans Niemann and Fabiano Caruana starting their US Championships 2024 with half a point. And that is, of course, an acceptable result for both. But of course, Hans must feel a bit disappointed after that missed chance in the early middle game. Super complex middle game. Credits to Fabi for trying to create some nice fight from an original opening concept. But he was in serious trouble for some time. And hopefully Hans doesn't get too crazy about it. He has many more rounds to go to, and there are enough chances to collect some more points. So let's see what's going to happen in the coming rounds. So I hope you did enjoy watching this video. If so, like it, share this video among your friends, and of course you can support the channel by making a PayPal donation. Everything is possible. Let me know what you think of it, and stay tuned for more action from St. Louis.